mind your own business. Those 4 words changed the way I looked at my family. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 72 years old, a retired elementary school teacher living in Columbus, Ohio, and until that afternoon, I believed that helping family was one of the purest forms of love. My husband passed away 6 years ago, and since then, my son Daniel, my daughter-in-law Lauren, and my granddaughter Emma had become the center of my world. I never wanted to control anyone. I never wanted to interfere. I simply wanted to be present. That afternoon began like many others. Emma had come home from school looking unusually quiet. Normally, she would rush into the kitchen, grab a snack, and tell me about her day. Instead, she walked past me with her backpack still hanging from one shoulder and disappeared upstairs. I noticed her eyes looked red, as though she had been crying. At first, I told myself she was probably tired. Teenagers have difficult days. Still, something about her expression stayed with me. About 20 minutes later, I heard soft footsteps on the staircase. Emma appeared in the hallway holding her phone. She looked upset. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just hurt. The kind of hurt a child tries very hard to hide. I set down the dish towel I was folding and walked over to her. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" I asked gently. She hesitated. Her eyes lowered toward the floor. Before she could answer, Lauren stepped into the hallway from the living room. The atmosphere changed immediately. Emma grew silent. Lauren looked at me and forced a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Everything is fine," she said. I nodded slowly. "Emma seems upset. I was only asking if she wanted to talk." Lauren crossed her arms. The smile disappeared. Then she said the words I still remember perfectly. "Margaret, mind your own business." The hallway fell silent. Even Emma looked surprised. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. I had spent years helping this family. I babysat when schedules became impossible. I attended school events. I drove Emma to activities when her parents were busy. I showed up whenever I was needed. Yet there I stood, being treated like an outsider for asking a simple question. I looked at Emma. She seemed embarrassed. I looked at Lauren. Her expression remained firm. Daniel was still at work and knew nothing about what was happening. I could have argued. I could have defended myself. Instead, I quietly stepped back. "Of course," I said. "I did not mean any harm." Lauren nodded once and guided Emma toward the kitchen. The conversation was over, at least for them. That evening, I drove home with a strange feeling in my chest. It was not anger. It was confusion. Lauren had never spoken to me that way before. The more I replayed the moment, the less sense it made. Why had Emma looked so distressed? Why had Lauren reacted so quickly? And why did it feel as though I had stumbled into something I was never supposed to notice? Sitting alone in my living room later that night, I stared at a family photograph taken the previous Christmas. Everyone was smiling. Everyone looked happy. Yet for the first time, I wondered whether I had mistaken proximity for trust. And as the house grew quiet around me, I realized a troubling possibility. Maybe Lauren was not trying to keep me out of one conversation. Maybe she had been slowly pushing me out of their lives for much longer than I realized. For the next several days, I could not stop thinking about that moment in the hallway. The words themselves were unpleasant, but it was not the words that troubled me most. It was the look on Emma's face. I had spent 13 years watching my granddaughter grow from a shy little girl into a thoughtful young teenager. I knew when she was excited. I knew when she was nervous. And I knew when something was wrong. The following Saturday, I attended one of Emma's school choir performances. I arrived early, as I always did, and found a seat near the middle of the auditorium. Parents filled the rows around me. The stage lights glowed softly while students prepared backstage. As I looked around, I noticed several familiar faces. Over the years, I had attended countless school events, bake sales, fundraisers, and concerts. Many of the other parents knew me well. A woman named Karen sat beside me and smiled warmly. We exchanged greetings and talked about how quickly children grow up. Then she casually mentioned something that caught my attention. "Emma seems excited about next year," she said. I smiled. "Does she?" Karen nodded. "I imagine she is looking forward to the transition." I hesitated. "What transition?" Karen looked surprised. "Oh, I thought you knew." Before she could continue, another parent interrupted the conversation, and the moment passed. Yet the uneasy feeling remained. What exactly was I supposed to know? When the performance ended, I waited in the lobby hoping to congratulate Emma. Families gathered around students holding flowers and taking photographs. I watched Lauren approach Emma first. They spoke quietly. Then Lauren looked across the room and saw me. Almost immediately, she guided Emma toward another exit. I raised my hand to wave, but they were already gone. Standing alone in the crowded lobby, I felt something I had not felt before. Exclusion. Not accidental. Not circumstantial. Intentional. That evening, I called Daniel. We spoke for nearly 20 minutes about work, the weather, and a recent home repair project. The conversation felt normal until I mentioned the choir performance. Emma did great tonight, I said. She looked happy. Daniel agreed. Then I asked a simple question. Karen mentioned some kind of transition next year. Do you know what she meant? There was a brief silence. I am not sure, Daniel replied. His answer sounded genuine. If there was a plan, he did not seem aware of it. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my living room. The more I reflected on recent events, the more patterns began to emerge. Family dinners had become less frequent. Invitations arrived later than they once did. School events were sometimes mentioned after they happened rather than before. Individually, each detail seemed insignificant. Together, they painted a different picture. I walked over to a bookshelf and picked up a framed photograph taken 5 years earlier. In the picture, Emma was smiling beside me at a county fair. Lauren stood behind us with her arm around Daniel. We looked like a close family. Looking at that photograph now, I found myself asking a difficult question. Had things truly changed recently, or had I simply failed to notice the distance growing between us? As the evening grew darker outside my window, I realized something important. The conversation in the hallway was not the beginning of the story. It was only the first moment when the truth became impossible to ignore. Over the next 2 weeks, I stopped asking direct questions and started paying closer attention. After 40 years as a teacher, I had learned something important about people. Most secrets reveal themselves when nobody realizes they are being observed. The change became noticeable almost immediately. Emma used to text me regularly. Sometimes she would send photographs of a project she was working on or a picture of the family dog doing something funny. Those little messages had always brightened my day. Now they became less frequent. Then they nearly stopped altogether. At first, I assumed she was simply busy with school. Teenagers grow older. Their lives become more complicated. Yet every time I tried to reach out, something felt different. One afternoon, I sent Emma a simple message asking how a science presentation had gone. Hours passed without a response. The next morning, she finally replied with only 2 words. It went fine. That was all. No details. No conversation. No follow-up questions. It felt unlike her. A few days later, I offered to take her to lunch over the weekend. Normally, she would have been excited. Instead, the answer arrived through Lauren. Emma already has plans. No explanation. No alternative date. Just a polite rejection. Sitting alone at my kitchen table, I found myself looking through old photographs again. There was one picture of Emma at age 7 proudly holding a ribbon she won at a county fair. Another showed us decorating cookies during Christmas break. We had always been close. The distance now felt unnatural. Then something happened that pushed my concerns beyond simple suspicion. The school hosted an art showcase on a Thursday evening. I attended because Emma had several pieces displayed in the student gallery. While walking through the exhibit, I stopped beside a display board featuring one of her drawings. A woman standing nearby smiled and introduced herself as the mother of another student. We exchanged small talk before she casually mentioned something that made my heart skip. Emma must be excited about next year, she said. I forced a smile. What do you mean? The woman looked surprised. The boarding school. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The what? She immediately looked uncomfortable. Oh, I assumed everyone knew. I am sorry. Before I could ask another question, she excused herself and moved away into the crowd. I stood there staring at Emma's artwork while my thoughts raced. Boarding school. The phrase echoed in my mind. Nobody had mentioned a boarding school. Not Daniel. Not Lauren. Not Emma. Yet this stranger spoke as though it were common knowledge. The drive home felt much longer than usual. Every conversation from the past several months began replaying in my head. The canceled visits. The unusual secrecy. The sudden distance. The comments from other parents. By the time I reached my driveway, I knew one thing with certainty. Something important was being discussed without me. That evening, I called Daniel. We talked briefly about ordinary things before I carefully brought up the subject. Has Emma been looking at different schools? I asked. There was a pause. Not that I know of, Daniel replied. His confusion sounded genuine. When the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room. If Daniel truly did not know, then the situation was even more troubling than I had imagined. For the first time, I began to wonder whether Lauren was not only shutting me out. Perhaps she was shutting other people out as well. And if that was true, then whatever was happening behind the scenes was far bigger than a rude comment in a hallway. That night, sleep did not come easily. The mention of a boarding school stayed with me long after midnight. I kept asking myself the same question. Why would anyone discuss such a major decision without telling the people closest to Emma? The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching the sunlight spill across the floor. My thoughts drifted backward through the years. Sometimes the present only makes sense when you remember the past. When Daniel married Lauren nearly 15 years earlier, I welcomed her into the family without hesitation. She was intelligent, ambitious, and full of energy. I remember how nervous she looked at their wedding rehearsal dinner. I spent most of the evening reassuring her that she was already part of our family. At the time, I truly believed we would always remain close. A few years later, when Daniel lost his job during a difficult economic period, they faced serious financial pressure. Their mortgage payments became overwhelming. Bills accumulated. The future looked uncertain. I never spoke about it publicly because family struggles deserve privacy, but I quietly stepped in to help. After my husband passed away, I received a modest life insurance payment. Instead of keeping every dollar for myself, I used part of it to help Daniel and Lauren keep their first home. I never considered it a sacrifice. I considered it family. When Emma was born, I became even more involved in their lives. Lauren returned to work shortly after maternity leave ended. For nearly 3 years, I watched Emma several days each week. I read books to her, took her to parks, helped her learn letters and numbers before kindergarten. Some of my happiest memories were created during those afternoons. Whenever Lauren thanked me, I always gave the same answer. That is what family does. Looking back now, I realized something uncomfortable. The more I helped, the more certain I became that we shared the same understanding of family. Perhaps that assumption was my mistake. Over the years, small changes occurred that I ignored at the time. Lauren gradually became the gatekeeper of information. School schedules came through her. Family plans came through her. Holiday gatherings were organized through her. If someone wanted to know what was happening, Lauren usually controlled the answer. At first, it seemed efficient. Now it looked different. Around noon, I opened an old photo album and slowly turned the pages. There was Emma at age 5 holding a pumpkin during a fall festival. There was Daniel painting a bedroom in their first house. There was Lauren smiling beside all of us at a 4th of July picnic. Every photograph represented a moment when I believed we were building something together. Yet as I studied those images, I found myself wondering whether Lauren viewed those years differently. Had she seen my involvement as support, or had she slowly begun seeing it as interference? The question stayed with me throughout the afternoon. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Emma. It was brief. "Hope you are doing well, Grandma." The message should have made me happy. Instead, it felt unusual, formal, careful, almost as though someone had encouraged her to send it. I responded warmly and asked how school was going. Several hours passed before another short reply arrived. "Busy but okay." Nothing more. Sitting alone in my living room, I stared at the screen for a long moment. The distance between us no longer felt accidental. Something was changing inside that family. Something significant. And for reasons I still did not understand, every path seemed to lead back to Lauren. The answer arrived when I least expected it. About a week after receiving Emma's unusually short messages, I attended a community education fundraiser at a local hotel near downtown Columbus. As a retired teacher, I still volunteered whenever schools needed support, and the annual fundraiser had become a tradition for many former educators. The ballroom was filled with familiar faces, conversations, and laughter. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Then I overheard a name that immediately caught my attention. Emma. I was standing near a display table when 2 women began discussing academic programs for gifted students. One of them mentioned a prestigious boarding school located more than 500 miles away. The other responded, "That is where the Whitmore girl is supposed to be going, right?" I froze. They were talking about Emma. I remained where I was, pretending to examine a brochure while listening carefully. The conversation continued for only a few moments, but it was enough. They spoke as though the decision had already been made, as though enrollment was simply a matter of paperwork and timing. By the time they moved on to another topic, my heart was racing. 500 miles. The number echoed in my mind during the entire drive home. This was no longer a rumor or a misunderstanding. Multiple people seemed aware of a plan that nobody had shared with me. More importantly, Daniel still appeared completely unaware. The next afternoon, I found myself thinking about Emma constantly. I remembered the little girl who used to spend Saturday mornings baking cookies in my kitchen. I remembered helping her with spelling words and science projects. I remembered every school play, every recital, every birthday celebration. None of those memories gave me ownership over her future. I understood that. Parents have the right to make decisions for their children. Yet something about this situation felt wrong. The secrecy bothered me more than the possibility of boarding school itself. That evening, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. Emma called me. It was the first time in weeks she had initiated contact on her own. Her voice sounded tired. Not unhappy exactly, just overwhelmed. We talked about school, friends, and an upcoming history assignment. Then, after a brief pause, she said something that immediately captured my attention. Things have been really busy lately. I asked what she meant. There was another pause. Just meetings and applications and stuff. Before I could ask another question, she quickly changed the subject. Still, the words lingered. Applications. The following day, I met my longtime friend Susan for lunch. Susan had spent 30 years working in school administration before retiring. When I casually mentioned boarding schools, she immediately recognized the name of the institution I had overheard at the fundraiser. Her expression changed. That school has an extensive admissions process, she explained. Families usually spend months preparing applications. Months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. Suddenly, many pieces began fitting together. The secrecy, the conversations, the growing distance, the controlled flow of information. Whatever Lauren was planning had not begun recently. It had likely been underway for quite some time. As I sat alone that evening watching the sunset through my living room window, I reached a conclusion that filled me with equal parts sadness and determination. This was never about one rude comment in a hallway. It was never about one canceled visit or one awkward conversation. Someone had been carefully building a future that removed me from Emma's daily life. And the closer I looked, the more it seemed that future was already being set into motion. After reaching that conclusion, I stopped focusing on rumors and started looking for facts. If a major decision about Emma's future was truly underway, then eventually someone would have to acknowledge it. The question was not whether the truth existed. The question was who would reveal it first. A few days later, Daniel called and invited me to dinner. His voice sounded normal, but something about the invitation felt unusual. Family dinners had become less frequent over the past year, and spontaneous invitations were rare. I accepted immediately. When I arrived at their house that Friday evening, everything appeared ordinary. Lauren greeted me politely. Emma was finishing homework at the kitchen table. Daniel was grilling in the backyard. On the surface, it looked like any other family gathering. Yet I noticed small details. Emma seemed distracted. Lauren checked her phone repeatedly. Daniel appeared tired. During dinner, the conversation stayed focused on safe topics. Work, school, weekend plans. Nobody mentioned boarding schools, applications, or future changes. The silence itself felt significant. After dessert, Daniel stepped outside to take a work call. Emma went upstairs. That left Lauren and me alone in the kitchen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren casually mentioned that Emma had been exploring new educational opportunities. The statement sounded carefully chosen. I looked at her calmly. What kind of opportunities? I asked. Lauren smiled. Nothing final. Just possibilities. It was the first time she had acknowledged anything at all. The fact that she remained vague told me even more. I nodded and changed the subject. There was no advantage in pushing. Later, that night, as I prepared to leave, Emma walked me to the front door. For a brief moment, we were alone. She hesitated before speaking. "Grandma," she said quietly, "have you ever been far away from everyone you know?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I answered honestly. "When I started college." Emma lowered her eyes. "Was it hard?" Before I could respond, Lauren called her name from the kitchen. Emma immediately stepped back. The conversation ended. Yet her question stayed with me during the entire drive home. The following week, another piece of the puzzle appeared. Daniel stopped by my house unexpectedly on a Sunday afternoon. We sat on the back patio drinking iced tea while discussing ordinary things. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward Emma's education. I decided to test something. She seemed stressed lately, I said. Daniel nodded. There has been a lot going on. I waited. Then I asked, what exactly has been going on? His response surprised me. Honestly, I am still trying to figure that out myself. I looked at him carefully. The confusion in his expression was genuine. For the first time, I realized Daniel might not be hiding information. He might be receiving only part of it. That realization changed everything. Until then, I had assumed Lauren and Daniel were working together. Now I began to suspect something different. Perhaps Lauren was controlling the flow of information inside her own household just as effectively as she controlled it outside. If that was true, then this situation was no longer about a grandmother being excluded. It was about a family being guided toward a decision that not everyone fully understood. And for the first time, I sensed that Daniel was beginning to notice the same thing. The turning point arrived sooner than I expected. A week after Daniel's visit, Lauren invited the family to dinner on a Sunday evening. The invitation sounded ordinary, but something about her tone felt unusually deliberate. By then, I had learned to trust those instincts. When I arrived, the atmosphere seemed carefully arranged. The dining table was set perfectly. Emma sat quietly in her usual chair. Daniel appeared distracted. Lauren, on the other hand, looked unusually confident. Throughout dinner, she guided the conversation with remarkable precision. Every topic seemed to lead toward the future. Academic opportunities, personal growth, independence, new experiences. It felt less like a family meal and more like preparation for an announcement. I listened carefully without interrupting. Eventually, Lauren set down her fork and smiled. There is something we should probably discuss as a family, she said. The room became still. Daniel glanced toward her with mild surprise. Emma lowered her eyes toward her plate. Lauren continued. She explained that Emma had extraordinary academic potential and deserved every opportunity available. She talked about specialized programs, advanced coursework, and preparing for college. Then she finally mentioned the boarding school by name. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I watched Daniel's face carefully. The surprise in his expression was unmistakable. He had clearly heard about the school before, but not to the extent Lauren was describing. More importantly, he appeared unaware that decisions were already moving forward. Lauren continued presenting information as though the matter had already been thoroughly discussed. Application deadlines, campus visits, housing arrangements, future plans. Every detail seemed remarkably developed. Finally, I asked a simple question. What does Emma think? The room fell silent again. Lauren answered first. We all want what is best for her. I nodded politely. That is not what I asked. Emma slowly looked up. For the first time that evening, everyone turned toward her. She hesitated. Then she quietly admitted that she was not sure what she wanted. The honesty in her voice struck me immediately. This was not the confident student excited about a new adventure. This was a 13-year-old girl trying to navigate decisions much larger than herself. Lauren's expression tightened slightly. Change is always uncomfortable at first, she said. Emma nodded but remained silent. Daniel finally spoke. I thought we were still exploring options. Lauren looked surprised by the comment. We are exploring options, she replied quickly, yet the folders stacked neatly beside her chair suggested otherwise. The conversation continued, but the tone had changed. Questions that had never been asked before suddenly began surfacing. Daniel wanted clarification about timelines. Emma wanted to know how often she could come home. I listened quietly while Lauren attempted to answer everything at once. For the first time since this entire situation began, the image of complete certainty she had carefully maintained began to crack. After dinner, while everyone helped clear the table, I found myself standing alone near the kitchen window. Lauren approached me. Her voice remained calm, but there was tension beneath it. I hope you are not making this harder than it needs to be, she said softly. I looked at her for a moment. Then I replied with complete honesty. Asking questions is not making something harder. Sometimes it is the only way people understand what is really happening. Neither of us said another word. Later that night, as I drove home through quiet suburban streets, I realized something important. For months, Lauren had controlled the narrative because nobody challenged it. Now that questions were being asked openly, that control was beginning to disappear. And once people start looking closely at the truth, it becomes much harder to hide. The days following that family dinner felt noticeably different. Nobody said it directly, but the balance inside the family had shifted. Questions were now being asked openly, and once questions begin, answers eventually follow. 3 days later, Daniel called me. His voice sounded unusually serious. He asked if I had time to meet for coffee. We agreed to meet the following morning at a small cafe near the park where I often walked. When I arrived, Daniel was already there. The moment I saw him, I knew something had changed. He looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing a situation is more complicated than you first believed. After a few minutes of small talk, he got straight to the point. "Mom, I have been reviewing some of the application materials Lauren put together. I listened quietly. There is more of it than I realized." He explained that after the dinner conversation, he had asked to see everything related to the boarding school. What he found surprised him. The research had been ongoing for nearly a year. Campus visits had been discussed. Application drafts had been prepared. Meetings had taken place. Several steps had already been completed long before he understood how far the process had advanced. The more he talked, the more one fact became clear. Lauren had not technically hidden the information. Instead, she had controlled it. Small pieces shared at carefully chosen moments. Enough to avoid direct conflict. Never enough to reveal the entire picture. Daniel stared down at his coffee cup. I honestly did not realize how much had already been decided. For the first time since this story began, I felt genuine sympathy for him. He was not discovering a secret. He was discovering how little involvement he had actually had in a process affecting his own daughter. A few days later, another conversation took place. This time at their home. Daniel asked Lauren to sit down with him and review everything together. Emma was present as well. Later that evening, Daniel called and told me what happened. As they reviewed the documents, emails, and timelines, Emma learned something surprising. Several assumptions had been made about what she wanted without anyone fully asking her opinion. Lauren had become so focused on creating opportunities that she stopped checking whether those opportunities matched Emma's wishes. According to Daniel, the most important moment occurred when Emma finally spoke honestly. She admitted that she felt pressured, not by the school itself, not by academics, by expectations. She worried about disappointing people. She worried about saying no. She worried that everyone had already decided what was best before she understood what she wanted. Hearing that changed everything. Suddenly, the conversation stopped being about boarding school. It became about communication, respect, listening, the very things that had been missing from the beginning. A week later, the entire family gathered for dinner once again. This time the atmosphere felt completely different. No presentations, no folders, no carefully prepared speeches. Just a family sitting together at a dining table. During the meal, Lauren finally addressed the situation directly. Her voice was calm, but noticeably softer than before. She admitted she had become convinced she was doing the right thing. She believed she was protecting Emma's future, providing opportunities, creating advantages. Somewhere along the way, however, she stopped inviting others into the conversation. She stopped asking questions because she thought she already knew the answers. No one argued. No one raised their voice. The truth did not require drama. It only required honesty. As I looked around the table that evening, I realized the real issue had never been a school located hundreds of miles away. The real issue was what happens when one person becomes so certain of being right that they stop listening to everyone else. And now, for the first time in a very long time, everyone was finally listening. Autumn arrived quietly that year. The trees around my neighborhood in Columbus slowly changed from green to shades of gold and amber, and with the changing season came a sense of peace I had not felt in months. Looking back, I realized the situation had never been about a boarding school alone. It had been about something much deeper. It was about being heard. It was about being respected. Most of all, it was about remembering that family relationships cannot thrive when one voice is allowed to speak for everyone else. In the weeks following our family dinner, the conversations inside Daniel's household changed noticeably. Decisions that once seemed predetermined became discussions instead. Emma was encouraged to share her thoughts openly. Daniel became more involved in every step of the process. Even Lauren approached things differently. She still cared deeply about Emma's future. That had never been the problem. The difference was that she finally understood that caring about someone and speaking for them are not the same thing. One Saturday afternoon, Emma visited me alone. It had been a long time since we had spent time together. Without schedules, plans, or tension hanging over the conversation. We sat at my kitchen table drinking hot chocolate while a tray of cookies cooled nearby. For a little while, it felt like old times. Then Emma looked at me and smiled. "I am glad everything slowed down," she said. I nodded. "So am I." She stirred her drink thoughtfully. I felt like everyone was talking about my future except me. Hearing those words confirmed everything I had suspected. This entire situation had affected her more than anyone realized. She was not a project to manage or a problem to solve. She was a young girl trying to understand her own path. We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon. About school, friends, goals, dreams. By the time she left, I felt hopeful again. Not because every challenge had disappeared, but because the people involved were finally listening to one another. A few days later, Lauren called. Her voice sounded different from the confident certainty I had grown accustomed to hearing. There was humility there now. Reflection. She apologized sincerely for the way she had handled things. Not only for the comment she made that afternoon in the hallway, but for months of decisions that had gradually pushed others aside. She admitted that she became so focused on creating opportunities that she stopped inviting people into the process. Most importantly, she acknowledged something she had never said before. "I should have listened more." Those 4 words carried far more weight than any argument ever could. Over time, trust slowly returned. Not instantly. Trust rarely works that way. It grows through actions, through consistency, through respect. Family dinners became enjoyable again. School events felt normal. Conversations no longer carried hidden agendas. And perhaps most importantly, Emma knew her voice mattered. One evening near the end of the year, I sat alone on my back porch watching the sunset. The air was cool. The neighborhood was quiet. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I found myself thinking about that moment in the hallway months earlier. At the time, those harsh words felt like rejection. They felt like a door closing. Yet strangely enough, they had also opened another door. They forced uncomfortable truths into the light. They revealed problems that had been growing quietly beneath the surface. They created conversations that needed to happen. Family is not built through control. It is not built through assumptions. It is not built through deciding what is best for others without hearing them first. Family is built through trust, through respect, through the willingness to listen even when the answers are not what we expect. And as the last light disappeared beyond the trees, I realized something important. The greatest act of love is not guiding someone toward the future you choose for them. The greatest act of love is standing beside them while they discover their own.